Having in y'all Rooster McNuggets. So Hitler said that if you tell a lie that's big enough and often enough, people will believe it. So what has happened? What is going on? I'm going to try to summarize all my videos into this one video because it seems that people are getting lost in the weeds. Okay, so where can we start with this, practically speaking? It's difficult to unravel what has happened because we've been manipulated and hypnotized. We've been told how to interpret certain things, and so when any time these events happen, we interpret the events through the lenses that we're given, and it just reinforces the narratives. So how do we unravel that programming? Well, we have to have a series of events that we can look at and see how this has happened, so we can start to capture the narrative that's actually happening as opposed to what's being told to us. Okay, so like I said, Hitler said if you just tell a lie big enough, often enough, people will believe it. So don't be surprised when this just seems way outside of your consideration. Just like it can't be that big or that simple, because most people would have caught on to it if that's the case. Don't buy into that trap, because that's exactly what they're banking on. They're banking on you going, it's probably not. That just seems so too outlandish. Okay, so how do we unravel this programming? Problem number one. Okay, when we say that we are the name of the corporation on a driver's license, then we associate ourselves with the jurisdiction of the sea. So we are bound by maritime law. That's what we're asking the judge to tell us. See, he says our name, and phonetically it sounds like our name, but so we say yes, but what we're saying yes to actually is that we're not sovereign agents of the land, but we are corporations of the citizenship that is birthed outside the land and therefore judged by maritime law. So we give up all of those things, right? So, well, why is that a problem? So, well, where did this come from? Let's get at that. You know, I mean, we're not judged by these courts like we think. Like I'm saying, we're actually being judged by maritime law when we do this. Okay, so people would say, well, what about the land law? Okay, so those are the two bodies that most law comes from. It comes from the land or comes from the sea, and depending on the jurisdiction, you know, it'll shift somewhat, right? But basically, they're asking you where you're from, and when you say that, then we condemn ourselves to the system that they've erected. But they're able to do sleight of hand because we're telling ourselves these stories that I'm in the United States and I have all these rights, but we don't understand that that is a constitutional United States that is no longer in operation. So what do I mean by that? When Washington, D.C. was created, which is a sovereign city-state, it was the third of 3 city-states that connected the dots to create a new world order. So you had they mimicked the United States in the sense that they have a judicial branch, a legislative branch, and an executive branch. So the judicial branch is governed and brought the ideas of the story, value, where these things come from. That's the story of Christ, and the Vatican has brought this whole concept of what the world is, and they're the Triple Crown, which rules over everything in the heaven, earth, and hell. And then you have London, the London Bar, or the City of London, which interprets that story. And then you have Washington, D.C., which acts as the executive arm of that interpretation. Now, once it's been interpreted, they carry out these agendas through countries, but they're not countries, they're actually incorporated city-states, right? Everything's a corporation now, including the cities that you live in, to the degree that The driver's license is referring, has a bold, all capitals name on it, which is referring to the corporation that phonetically sounds like your name. But it's not you. They're referring to the birth certificate, which is a product of the parents, which is signed over to the state, created a social security number. Why is that? Well, because when they created the Federal Reserve to keep us from going bankrupt, or these dips and peaks, well, that's what brought about the actual bankruptcy of the constitutional United States of America. And that's when they created the 1933 Banking Act. Is they snatched everybody's gold, and then they put out these banking reserve notes. They're not money, because the United States Constitution stipulates money as something that's backed by silver or gold. Now, they said that it's no longer tethered to the gold standard. So before this, you could walk in with your money and you could get gold for it. But then they severed that when United States Constitution, the constitutional United States went bankrupt, okay? And then they created a corporation, a United States corporation out of that. And that's what governs all the chattel, which only gives value to the banking notes because we go work for them. We've signed off on it. They're debt notes. So that's where our economy comes from. Now, that's the Federal Reserve as a private international banking corporation itself. So that doesn't, it's not a sovereign United States, but it's not in its interest to tell its citizens the case, because, well, then we might want to build value of ourselves. We would lose interest. And so that doesn't, so as long as we are trying to plan some kind of revolution or some type of stewarding sovereignty for each other so that we can gain value, keep value within ourselves, if we have it based on some US dollar structure, we've lost from the beginning. You cannot win that situation. And that's why they're not worried about it. And so they keep launching these events throughout history to further indoctrinate its peoples into a mental slavery. And that's why Bob Marley says you need to emancipate yourself out of this mental slavery. But in order to do that, we have to move into the heart, because if we're trying to think with our mind, we are, what did he say? We are trying to, Einstein says, you cannot use the same thinking that got you into the problem that you're in. That won't work. So we have to realize that we got it wrong. And so you can look back at these events and see how they created the Federal Reserve, then they went then the United States went bankrupt, and then they created the corporation, and about the same time, right in the 20s, they created the birth certificates. Then there was the Social Security numbers, and all of this is well, the sleight of hand was when they did the 1933 Banking Act. I think for me that point is like clear. Now you can see all these events leading up to that, and they frame it in a way to tell people how to interpret it. And it's just like starting wars, like the Gulf of Tonkin. They started World War II through an event that never even happened. But after everybody found out that it doesn't happen, it was already too late. They'd gone to war. Well, it's the same thing with all of these other events. We don't have any other inference or reference to pull from if we're just listening to the quote-unquote authorities, you know? And so they bank on that, and this is all by consent. So we sign off on it because we don't have any other narrative. And that's why I'm trying to give you a different story. What I'm saying is that there is no such thing as countries anymore. You know, these are the stories they give the peons so that they can continue to operate in the shadows as a world government. And they use countries as mercenaries, as it were, or to divide each other, whatever. But they're not really pulling the strings anymore. You have a transnational corporate totalitarian regime that's been in place for some time now. They're locking it in because most people actually think that there's value behind these dollars, and they think they're United States citizens or whatever, and so they think they're safe. Well, that's what actually holds up the system. That's what keeps it going, you know. And until we see that, and we can't awaken, you know. And so we have to start asking ourselves, how do we build other value? Well, it's between us. All we need is the earth, ourselves, and good thinking, you know. Well, of course the spirit has to be involved, which means that we're coming together and being open-minded and listening to our hearts of like what's best for everybody, not just my particular agenda, which is what comes from the mind. You know, we have to incorporate all these things, which is is something that is difficult to do when we don't have the proper narrative. You know, so all of these things are governed by stories, but we don't really understand where the stories come from. We don't know, like, we don't understand how math we use math all the time, but we don't know what numbers mean. We use words all the time to construct language and to communicate with each other, but we don't know where words come from. We don't know what symbols mean. We don't know what letters mean, right? So they construct these things to cast a spelling. A way that you frame reality once you've adopted that mindset, and that's how it is. So when they give you an official narrative for 9/11 or official narrative for COVID or whatever, basically what they're saying is, don't trust yourself, believe government, because you need us, and you should be very, very scared. Well, as soon as you interpret it like that, they got you. You're hooked. You know, government is slavery, y'all. Once we learn how to manage ourselves, we don't need them. We put them out of a job. They can't have that, you know. So what they do, they just keep scaring the shit out of us, and pitting fights against each other, instigating fights, so that we can't come to conclusions on our own terms, and we go ask them to regulate. You know, that's not freedom. That's slavery. You know. We're not building actual value. So that's what I'm trying to give y'all, you know. So it's hard to, it's like, so what are you saying? How the hell do we get out of this system? We don't go to work and we don't use dollars? Well, we should work for ourselves. We should establish what that means and talk about that with each other. Then we would already be building value. We already have the things that are necessary in order to actually build value, but we're not able to tap into it because we're not working within those networks and that frame of reference. You know, we think that we have to go get money in order to do these things. Well, they got us so locked in that it's difficult to move around without that. But what I'm saying is, when you switch your priorities and you realize what I'm saying is true, you don't have to work for money anymore, or dollars, or all this fake ass shit. I mean, if it comes, then fine, you utilize it to move out of that even further every time you come up on some more, you know. And so that way we're getting more and more into the fuck you position. We're becoming more and more sovereign, you know, as opposed to becoming more and more indebted, you know, and thinking that because we got a bunch of money that we've got something, but it's not real money. You know, there's no real value in that. All we're doing is pimping each other, and they're not doing a very good job at it either. I mean, they're doing a fantastic job of keeping us in the dark, you know. So anyways, I feel like I'm kind of going around in circles, but maybe that clarifies things. I know that it's very, very hard to swallow. I know this is far from what you were ever told, and it's taken me my whole life to uncover this stuff. But that's why I live the way that I live, because I know it to be true, you know. And if we want to engage in a free society, then we have to learn how to govern ourselves so that we can give people the dignity. And we're not going to do that if we don't believe in universal law. And that's why government, all they have to do is poke and prod us and get us into fear, because then we think that there is no universal law. Who will ever reign order if it's not some strong man or some government coming in? And that was the idolatry that God always warned about. He said, you don't need anybody else. You're already in tune with source. You just have to acknowledge that, because that's the blasphemy of the Holy Spirit, the only unpardonable sin. Is to not listen to what you are already born with, and to step up to that, to rule oneself, you know, and to treat other people likewise, you know, like in a sense that not rule over them, but to treat them with respect, as if they would, just like we want dignity to do our own thing, then as long as we're not stepping on others, you know. And that's not, words are just words, you know. People have fucked this all up and thinking that, you know, if I say something that hurts your feelings, then I'm somehow harming others, you know. That's just not the case, you know. If you get hurt because of the words that I'm saying, well, then you must not have a very solid foundation, you know, because falsities are just that. They don't threaten anybody that's genuinely secure, you know. And so, well, if we all stood together in the power that we already have, we would be secure. And that's the tragedy, y'all, is that we actually can liberate ourselves today, if we claimed our sovereignty and said no more. No, I'm not that person on my driver's license. No, we can start to talk to each other in totally different names, totally different economies, you know, and build it from the scratch. That's what we got to do at this point. But not scratch in the sense that we have to figure out what's true and real, you know. And we know these things. The world knows them. To be honest, to live with integrity, to have transparency, to treat people with kindness and dignity, you know. These things are very straightforward, and no society really operates well without them, you know. So, and where they come from, God. They come from something outside of our God, because it's not like I made them up or you made them up. They tie our subjective reality together, and so that's why we can trust in it. We build physics, we build mathematics, we build languages off of these things, but then we don't trust in where they come from, and that's why they've got us blinded, and that's why they call us zombies and the undead. Because we haven't begun the journey to looking at these things. We don't actually know who we are. And so we're considered lost souls by the Vatican, SOLE, because we claim to be a corporation when in actuality we are sovereign beings that have inherited the kingdom. But if we don't know how to claim as much and to stand in that, not just talk it, but to walk it out, then they're going to continue to play us. So anyways, I hope that doesn't confuse, and I hope it illuminates. Love y'all.